Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Gary Dordan. Dordan was shot and killed on Sunday, July 1st, 2018 in the 4500 block of South Van Ness Avenue in Hyde Park, according to LA County coroner records. Brandon Dixon, Dijon Wright, and Omario Guerrero were subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. The Rolling 40s neighborhood Crips and the Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips are affiliated criminal street gangs with territories that border one another in South Los Angeles. Starting in 2013, the two gangs, although technically aligned, often feuded with each other, stemming from a dispute about a homicide that occurred that year. Defendant Dixon is a Rolling 60s gang member. In the months leading up to the shooting in this case, Defendant Dixon had regular contact both in person and by phone with two other Rolling 60s gang members, Omario Guerrero and Dijon Wright, both of whom were several years younger than Defendant Dixon. Guerrero was a minor. Photographs of Defendant Dixon, Guerrero, and Wright flashing Rolling 60s hand signs, along with other active members of the gang, were shown to the jury. Gary Dordan, a former Rolling 40s gang member and the murder victim in this case, was a community gang intervention worker for a non-profit organization that worked with the City of Los Angeles Mayor's Office Gang Reduction and Youth Development Program. Mr. Dordan's work involved outreach to community members and gang members following gang-related incidents, mentoring youths, and organizing and participating in peacekeeping events, such as baseball and softball games between gang members. On July 1st, 2018, Mr. Dordan was at Peck Park in San Pedro where such a baseball game was being played. TM was at the park that day watching the game with a friend. A loud commotion arose behind where TM and her friend were seated. A group of 15 to 40 men were in the parking lot yelling at each other. TM testified they were dark-skinned, but she was too far away to be certain of the race and age of any other men involved in the disturbance. Because there were little kids in the park, TM decided to call 911, and then she and her friend left. The audio recording of her 911 call was played for the jury. Officer Christian Portillo of the LAPD was on patrol with his training officer that afternoon. Sometime around 5 p.m., they received a radio call about a disturbance at Peck Park. They arrived at the park within a few minutes, but didn't see anything unusual going on at the time. Around 7 o'clock that same evening, Kevin arrived at the home of his friend FJ, who lived in the 4500 block of Van Ness Avenue, an area controlled by the Rolling 40s. The home was known as a location where Rolling 40s gang members went to socialize, drink, and gamble. Kevin used to live in the neighborhood and remain friends with FJ and his adult son, TJ. When Kevin arrived at FJ's home, he encountered the victim in front of the house and spoke with him for about 5 minutes before he went inside. Kevin had been the victim's neighbor for 22 years. The victim's truck was parked in the driveway, and there were two women seated in the truck whom Kevin didn't know, one seated in the front passenger seat and the other in the back seat. Kevin came back outside to talk to the victim and TJ, who were standing close together on the passenger side of the victim's truck. Kevin leaned back against a nearby palm tree with his back to the street as he talked to the victim and TJ. Kevin was startled by the sound of multiple gunshots. He ran towards FJ's front door. He was hit by multiple bullets in his stomach and neck. From inside the house, FJ also heard multiple shots and immediately opened the door to see what was going on. He saw two men in the street, about 4 or 5 feet apart, shooting at the victim's truck as the victim stood by the passenger side of the truck. After the shooting stopped, FJ helped Kevin inside his home while TJ called the police. Kevin eventually underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage from the multiple gunshot wounds. Kevin testified he didn't see the driver or the shooters because he had not been facing toward the street. TJ denied seeing what had happened, but admitted he called 911. A witness was working in his front yard when a dark-colored car zoomed down the street and stopped abruptly near FJ's home. Two men immediately jumped out of the car, both holding handguns. They ran towards the group of men in the driveway and fired multiple shots. The witness saw muzzle flash from both guns and estimated he heard at least 15 shots. The two men then ran back to the car and it sped off. The witness testified he did not see the face of either shooter and did not see the driver of the car. LAPD Officer Richard Oak and his partner were the first to arrive on the scene. Officer Oak saw the victim on the ground next to the passenger side of his truck. He appeared to be dead from gunshot wounds. Officer Oak went inside the home and spoke with Kevin, who was bleeding but alive. Portions of Officer Oak's body camera footage were played for the jury. An autopsy later confirmed that the victim died from fatal gunshot wounds. LAPD homicide detective Clifton Rose was assigned to investigate the shooting incident and the victim's murder. Detective Rose was aware of the feud between the Rolling 40s and the Rolling 60s that had been going on for several years. He learned that defendant was a Rolling 60s gang member who was on parole, and that one of the conditions of his parole required him to wear an ankle monitor device with GPS tracking. Detective Rose discovered that defendant's ankle monitor showed that he was at the scene of the shooting and had also been at Peck Park earlier in the day, sometime around 5 p.m. Video footage from security cameras and nearby traffic cameras showed that the shooters arrived on Van Ness Avenue in a black Mazda with a white Uber sticker on the windshield and a Nevada license plate. Detective Rose discovered the Mazda was a rental car. The agency that owned the car reported that it had not been returned and considered it stolen. The police went to defendant's home on West 133rd Street looking for the black Mazda. When they arrived, they didn't see the Mazda, but there was a red Kia parked in front with a female in the driver's seat. A male passenger was seated in the back. The officers could not identify either individual as they drove by. Shortly thereafter, the officers drove to a duplex in the 3200 block of West 59th Street. The duplex was a known hangout or stronghold for the Rolling 60s. The prosecution's gang expert testified that members used that location as a safe place to socialize, to plan criminal activities, and to store cars and weapons. When the officers drove past the duplex, they saw the same red Kia parked out front that they had seen at defendant's house less than an hour before. The same female was in the driver's seat, and they saw a male passenger in the back seat, whom they observed wearing a baseball hat. The red Kia started to drive off. The officers were driving in the opposite direction, so they had to turn around to follow the Kia. By the time they caught up to the Kia, the male passenger was no longer in the car. When the driver failed to signal before turning, the officers pulled the car over. During the traffic stop, they saw a white Uber sticker on the floorboard of the car and a key fob in the back seat. The key fob was later identified as the keys to the black Mazda. That same day, the police located the black Mazda parked on West 59th Street, a short distance away from the Rolling 60 stronghold. Video footage from security and traffic cameras, analysis of cell phone and cell tower records, and the GPS tracking information from defendant's ankle monitor showed his movements on July 1st, 2018. Early in the afternoon, defendant drove the black Mazda to a car wash and met up with one of the accomplices in the shooting, Guerrero, who was wearing distinctive red pants with a white stripe down the side. They hung out together at the car wash for about an hour. Defendant then drove the Mazda back to his home on West 133rd Street. Meanwhile, Guerrero and the other accomplice, Wright, went to a shopping mall a short distance away. The video footage recovered from security cameras showed them in clothing that was consistent with the clothing worn by the shooters depicted in the video footage of the shooting. Guerrero in red pants with a white stripe, and Wright in acid-wash jeans. Around 5 p.m., defendant went to a gas station and then drove to Peck Park, lingering in the parking lot area for about 10 minutes before making a stop at a liquor store and eventually going to the Rolling 60 stronghold on West 59th Street around 6:20 p.m. Defendant remained there till around 7:15. Cell phone records show that Guerrero and Wright were also at the stronghold during this time period. The GPS records show that defendant left the stronghold and traveled into Rolling 40's territory, arriving at FJ's house on Van Ness just before 7:30 p.m. Video footage showed the black Mazda driving past FJ's home, circling around the block, and then returning and stopping in front of FJ's home. Two individuals jumped out of the Mazda wearing hoodies over their heads and the same distinctive clothing Guerrero and Wright were wearing earlier in the day. Both individuals had their arms outstretched in the shooting position. After the shooters ran back to the Mazda and jumped in, the Mazda sped off. Defendant's GPS monitor showed that he traveled back to Rolling 60's territory and returned to the gang stronghold on West 59th Street. The hood of the victim's truck sustained damage consistent with ricochet impacts from bullets. A bullet path analysis was performed and indicated that the bullets that likely left those impact marks were fired from the back driver's side of the truck toward the front passenger side. LAPD Sergeant Jaime Avila testified as the prosecution's gang expert. He explained that gang members often use stolen cars to commit crimes and then abandon them afterwards because they were not easily traced back to them. Gang members were also well aware of the prevalence of security cameras and routinely cover their heads or faces when committing crimes. He explained that gang culture is based on earning and maintaining respect, and that acts of disrespect, even a verbal argument, could lead to retaliation against a rival gang member or gang. Retaliation could be and often was exacted by other members of the gang, and not necessarily by the individual who was disrespected. Sergeant Avila said that younger gang members, particularly minors, were often assigned to carry out the shootings because gang members know that minors often receive shorter prison sentences than adults. Following the trial, the jury found defendant Dixon guilty of first-degree murder, shooting at an occupied motor vehicle, and 4 counts of attempted murder. The court sentenced defendant to a term of life plus 75 years. The charges against Guerrero and Wright were resolved separately before trial via plea agreements. Gary Twin Dordan was 48 years old at the time of death.